I overheard my fiancée say that she wanted to try a taller guy, and then she called me a freak for. Phil and Jennifer's love story seemed like something out of a fairy tale. They met in high school, two 17-year-olds who found an instant, almost fated connection. While other teenage relationships fizzled out after a few months, theirs only grew stronger. They went to college together, supported each other through tough exams and part-time jobs, and eventually moved in together after graduation. For nearly a decade, Phil and Jennifer built a life side by side. It wasn't always perfect. There were the usual arguments about dishes left in the sink or forgetting important dates, but their bond was unshakable. Phil was utterly devoted to her, and Jennifer, with her bright eyes and effortless laughter, seemed just as committed. When Phil proposed, he did it with the exact ring Jennifer had once pointed out in a shop window. She had barely finished saying, "Oh, it's beautiful," when Phil made a mental note, secretly saving up for it over the next year. When he finally got down on one knee, her eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. Their wedding was set for June 2025. Invitations had gone out, venues booked, and Jennifer had already found her dream dress. Everything was lining up for the perfect life they had always envisioned. Until one night changed everything. That night was ordinary at first. Phil came home late from work. He had been putting in extra hours to ensure they could afford a beautiful honeymoon. Jennifer greeted him with a tired smile, mentioning she was heading to bed early. "I'm exhausted," she said, kissing his cheek absent-mindedly before slipping into the bedroom. Phil wasn't worried. Wedding planning had been stressful, and Jennifer had been working late as well. She had always been a light sleeper, so he made sure to be quiet as he grabbed a beer and settled onto the couch with his laptop. That's when it happened. Phil had been scrolling through emails when a message popped up from Jennifer's phone, which was still connected to their shared cloud account. He wasn't snooping. He barely glanced at it, until the words caught his eye. "I can't stop thinking about tonight. I still feel you on me." Phil froze. His heart pounded as he stared at the message. It was from an unsaved number, but the tone was unmistakable. His stomach twisted as a second message appeared. "God, I wish I could be in your arms right now instead of lying next to him." For a moment, Phil's mind refused to process what he was seeing. Jennifer? No. It had to be a mistake. A misunderstanding. Maybe it was an old message? Or some kind of joke. His hands trembled as he unlocked Jennifer's phone. He knew her passcode, of course. They had always been open with each other. His breath came in shallow gasps as he navigated to her messages, his pulse hammering in his ears. The thread was still open. "Jennifer, you make me feel alive in a way I haven't in years. I don't know what to do." Unknown number. "You don't have to do anything, baby. Just say the word and we'll figure it out." His vision blurred. Years? Years? Phil scrolled, his hands shaking. He should stop. He didn't want to see more, but he couldn't stop himself. The messages went back months. Whispered confessions. Desperate longing. Plans to meet. Hotel rooms. Lies disguised as work events. Phil read the words over and over again, hoping that if he stared hard enough, they would change. That they wouldn't mean what he knew deep down they did. His Jennifer, his best friend, his future wife, had been cheating on him. And from the way the messages read, she wasn't just cheating physically. She was in love with someone else. His stomach churned, nausea rising. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. He could hear her breathing softly in the next room, completely unaware that her world was about to shatter. For a moment, Phil just sat there, phone in hand, staring at the messages. Part of him wanted to burst into the bedroom and demand answers. Another part of him wanted to pretend he never saw them, to delete the conversation and go back to the way things were before. But the words on the screen burned into his mind. There was no going back. Jennifer had betrayed him. And now, he had to decide what came next. Phil couldn't unsee the messages. Couldn't unhear the words replaying in his mind. "I can't stop thinking about tonight. You make me feel alive." Those words weren't meant for him. They belonged to someone else. Someone Jennifer had let in while she had been planning their future together. But Phil didn't say anything. Not yet. Instead, he watched. He watched as Jennifer moved through their shared life as if nothing had changed. She still kissed him goodbye before work. Still sent texts with little heart emojis. Still curled up next to him on the couch. But now, every touch felt wrong. Forced. A cover for something darker underneath. He paid attention to the things he had once ignored. The moments that didn't add up. And then came the night that shattered whatever was left of his trust. It was a Friday, and Jennifer had gone out for a girls' night, something she did every now and then with Melissa and a few other friends. Normally, Phil didn't think much of it. But now, every time she left the house, his gut twisted with suspicion. She came back late that night, her laughter a little too loud, her steps a little too unsteady. She smelled like wine, perfume, and something Phil couldn't quite place. He was lying in bed, pretending to be asleep, when he heard her phone buzz. A quick glance showed it was a message from Melissa. "Melissa, you better not back out now. Winking-faced tall guys are a different world, trust me." Phil's chest tightened. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just lay there as Jennifer typed out a reply. "Jennifer. Stop, I haven't even decided yet. But yeah. I kinda want to." Phil felt his stomach drop. She didn't even have the decency to hide it. She was lying next to him, in their bed, texting about whether she wanted to cheat. He stayed quiet. Forced himself to keep breathing steadily. He needed to know more. Over the next few days, he noticed how Jennifer's behavior shifted. She started dressing differently. It wasn't just the occasional extra effort. No, this was deliberate. New dresses, new shoes, perfume he had never smelled before. She would leave for work in her usual scrubs, but some nights she would come home looking too polished for someone who had just finished a long shift at the hospital. Phil checked her schedule, something he had never done before. What he found made his blood run cold. Jennifer wasn't even scheduled to work those nights. She was lying. Again. More pieces started falling into place. The sudden habit of turning her phone screen away when he entered the room. The new passwords on accounts they used to share. The texts that she would delete before setting her phone down. One evening, Phil casually mentioned, "Hey, I was thinking of surprising you at work one night. Bringing dinner or something." Jennifer's reaction was immediate. She laughed, too quickly, too forced. "Oh, babe, that's sweet, but it's so busy at night. I barely get a break. And my coworkers are always stealing food anyway." Phil nodded, keeping his face neutral. But he knew. She wasn't at work. She was somewhere else. With someone else. Then, as if fate wanted to twist the knife deeper, Melissa slipped up. It happened at a small gathering at their place. Nothing fancy, just a few drinks, some music, laughter. But Phil was watching. Listening. Melissa, already tipsy, leaned in close to Jennifer and giggled. "So, how was it?" Jennifer's eyes darted to Phil for the briefest second. It was fast, but not fast enough. Melissa's face paled. I meant, the new doctor you were working with. You said he was, like, super intimidating, right?" Phil's jaw clenched. Jennifer forced a smile. Yeah, he is." A horrible silence stretched between them before Melissa quickly turned the conversation to something else. Phil felt sick. That was it. The proof he needed. He wasn't crazy. Jennifer had done it. Or, at the very least, she had let herself get close enough to doing it that her friends knew more about her relationship than he did. That night, Phil sat in their apartment, staring at the woman he had loved for nearly a decade. He remembered the first time he told her he loved her. The way her eyes lit up, the way she had whispered it back like it was the most natural thing in the world. Now she was someone else, and he had no idea what to do. Phil felt like a ghost in his own life. Every glance Jennifer threw his way, every kiss on the cheek, every "I love you" felt like an act now. He saw it all for what it was, a performance. She played the role of the devoted fiancée when she needed to, but the cracks were there, and now that he was looking, he couldn't unsee them. The missing hours, the locked phone, the nervous glances, the messages from Melissa, the two perfect outfits for hospital shifts that weren't even on her schedule. And then, the doorbell camera sealed it. Phil had set up the camera months ago for security reasons. It wasn't something he checked often, but that night, as Jennifer left for her so-called night shift, something gnawed at him. He sat on the couch, staring at the front door long after she had left. Finally, after a deep breath, he pulled up the app. There she was. Jennifer stood at the door, adjusting the hem of a sleek, black dress, one Phil had never seen before. Her hair was curled, lips painted a bold red, perfume so thick in the air that it lingered even after she was gone. This was not work attire. Phil watched as she smoothed her dress one last time, checking her reflection in the window before disappearing into the night. His hands clenched into fists. He pulled up his phone and opened the hospital's online scheduling system. He still had her login. She had given it to him ages ago when she kept forgetting her shift. His stomach dropped as he read the schedule. She wasn't working tonight. Phil sat motionless, his mind racing. The pieces all fit now, every lie clicking into place. There was only one thing left to do. He grabbed his keys and followed her. It didn't take long to find her. There was only one place she could be. The bar. The same bar where Melissa had joked about setting her up with a tall guy. The one where the basketball coach hung out. Phil parked across the street, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He didn't even know what he was expecting. A conversation? A drink between friends? Something more? He already knew the answer. Through the window, he saw her. Jennifer was sitting at the bar, laughing, twirling her hair around her finger, leaning in close to a tall, broad-shouldered man. Her body language was unmistakable. This wasn't an innocent night out. She wasn't just meeting friends. She was flirting. And she looked happy. Happier than she had been with him in months. Phil sat there, watching, the realization hitting him harder than he expected. She had already moved on. She was just waiting for the right time to let go of him, or maybe she had planned to keep both lives running parallel until she decided which one suited her better. He should have stormed in. Should have confronted her on the spot, humiliated her in front of everyone the way she had humiliated him. But he didn't. Instead, he drove home, opened a beer, and waited. At 6 a.m., the front door opened. Jennifer walked in quietly, careful not to make any noise. She smelled like liquor and perfume. She didn't even glance in his direction as she slipped off her heels and tiptoed toward the bedroom. Phil took a deep breath. How was work? She froze. For a second, she didn't turn around. Then, slowly, she forced a tired smile. Of exhausting. Non-stop patience all night. She stretched, yawning. I'm gonna shower, then crash for a bit. Phil nodded, watching her closely. Yeah. You must be tired. She was about to disappear into the bedroom when he spoke again. Jennifer. She paused, hand gripping the doorframe. You weren't at work. A beat of silence. Then, she laughed. What are you talking about? Phil pulled out his phone, tapping the screen. The doorbell camera recorded you. You left in a dress. Not scrubs. And you weren't on the schedule. Jennifer's smile faltered. Her lips parted, searching for an excuse, but nothing came. Phil kept his voice calm. You were at the bar. I saw you. And just like that, she broke. Her face crumpled as tears welled up in her eyes. Phil, I can explain, it's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like? He let out a sharp, humorless laugh. You lied to my face. You told me you were working. You deleted texts. You changed passwords. You've been sneaking around for how long? She sniffled, wiping her eyes. I swear, I didn't do anything. It was just a stupid night out. I was just talking to him. Phil's voice was cold. Then why lie about it? Jennifer shook her head, her tears falling freely now. I don't know, okay? I was scared you'd get mad. I knew it would look bad, but I wasn't cheating, I swear. Phil stared at her, expression unreadable. Wedding's off. Jennifer's breath hitched. For a moment, she looked like she hadn't heard him. Like the words were foreign, some impossible concept that didn't make sense in her world. Then, her face changed. The tears dried up almost instantly, replaced by something uglier. Are you serious? Phil nodded. Completely. Jennifer's hands clenched into fists. Wow. So that's it? You're just gonna throw away everything over a misunderstanding? Phil scoffed. A misunderstanding? You lied to me for months. Jennifer's voice rose. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was engaged to the FBI. God, Phil, you're so insecure. He shook his head in disbelief. Insecure? You are the one sneaking around behind my back and I'm insecure. Jennifer crossed her arms, her face twisted in rage. You're overreacting. I wasn't sleeping with him. But, you know what? Maybe I should have. Phil exhaled sharply, shaking his head. I'm done, Jennifer. She let out a bitter laugh. Good. You were never exciting enough anyway. And with that, she stormed out. The fallout was immediate. Mutual friends started calling, messaging, asking what had happened. Jennifer had gotten to them first. She spun the story to make herself the victim. Phil was controlling, jealous, crazy. He had stalked her, monitored her phone, invaded her privacy. She made it sound like she had been trapped in a relationship with a possessive lunatic. Some of their friends took her side. Others knew better. Phil didn't bother defending himself. The truth didn't need an audience. What mattered was that he was free. And Jennifer? She had finally gotten to try her taller guy. She just hadn't expected to lose everything else in the process. Phil had been prepared for Jennifer's lies. He had braced himself for her twisting the story, making herself the victim, painting him as the controlling, insecure fiancé who had overreacted. But nothing could have prepared him for what he learned next. It happened by accident. A few days after he had called off the wedding, Phil met up with some mutual friends at a bar, just an attempt to clear his head, to distract himself from the chaos Jennifer had left behind. He hadn't planned to talk about her, but her name still came up. Everyone had heard some version of what happened, though the details varied depending on who had last spoken to Jennifer. That's when he met Kyle. Kyle was Melissa's boyfriend. A guy Phil had seen around but never really talked to. That night, though, Kyle approached him with a drink in hand and an expression that was almost apologetic. Look, man, I don't know how much you already know, but you deserve to hear this. Phil raised an eyebrow. Hear what? Kyle sighed and leaned in, lowering his voice. Melissa told me everything. About Jennifer. About the basketball coach. About how it was all planned from the start. Phil's stomach twisted. Planned. Kyle nodded. Yeah. It wasn't some random girls' night where she just happened to run into that guy. Jennifer and Melissa set it up weeks ago. Phil clenched his jaw. Keep talking. Kyle hesitated for a second before continuing. Melissa thought it would be fun to help Jennifer try out someone taller before she got married. She told Jennifer that if she didn't do it now, she'd regret it later. So they picked the coach. The guy's tall, good-looking, makes good money. Melissa promised to introduce them, to make sure he knew Jennifer was single and looking. Phil exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the table. Kyle shook his head. Man, I'm telling you this because I feel gross knowing they did this. It wasn't just cheating, it was premeditated. They went there with one goal, to get Jennifer with another guy. To see if she could do better than you. Phil stayed silent, his pulse pounding in his ears. He should have been furious. He should have wanted to find Jennifer and scream at her for what she had done. But all he felt was relief. Jennifer had tried to cheat. She had set up the entire thing, dressed up, lied to his face, walked into that bar with every intention of leaving with another man. And she had failed. Kyle chuckled bitterly, shaking his head. Here's the funniest part. The coach? He barely even noticed her. Talked to her for maybe 5 minutes before moving on. Didn't flirt, didn't buy her a drink, just wasn't interested. She tried all night to get his attention, but he ignored her. She left that bar looking humiliated. Phil let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It was pathetic. Jennifer had wanted to betray him. She had wanted to sleep with someone else. But she wasn't even good enough at cheating to pull it off. She threw away everything they had for nothing. Kyle sighed. I don't know what you want to do with that information, man. But I figured you should know. Phil nodded, finishing his drink in one long gulp. I appreciate it. He didn't plan to confront Jennifer. He was done. He had told himself that over and over again, she's not worth it, she's not worth another second of your time. But when she showed up at his apartment 2 nights later, sobbing and begging to talk, he let her in. Not because he wanted her back. Not because he was even curious about what she had to say. He just wanted to see her, to look her in the eye and know he had made the right decision. Jennifer stood in the middle of the living room, her face streaked with tears, her voice shaking. "Phil, please. Just let me explain." Phil leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Go ahead." She swallowed hard, as if trying to piece together the perfect excuse. God, I messed up. I was stupid. I let Melissa get in my head, and I wasn't thinking. I was panicking about the wedding, and I thought. Thought what? Phil cut in, his voice sharp. That you'd test drive another guy before settling for me? Jennifer flinched. No. It wasn't like that. I got scared, Phil. I started wondering if I was making a mistake, if I was settling down too soon, and Melissa, she made it sound like it was normal to have doubts. Phil nodded slowly. So your solution was to lie to my face, sneak around, and plan to cheat. Jennifer let out a broken sob. I didn't cheat. I didn't even touch him. He wasn't interested in me, and I felt so stupid. The whole night was a disaster, and I knew right away that I had made the biggest mistake of my life. Phil stared at her for a long moment before letting out a dry, humorless laugh. That's what's killing you, isn't it? Jennifer blinked. What? You weren't rejected by me. You were rejected by him. Phil shook his head. If he had taken you home that night, you would have done it. You know it, and I know it. The only reason you're standing here begging for another chance is because he didn't want you. Jennifer opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Because she knew he was right. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head, voice barely above a whisper. I love you, Phil. I swear to God I love you. Please, just give me a chance to prove it. Phil's face remained cold, emotionless. He had spent years loving this woman, building a life with her, and now, looking at her, broken, desperate, humiliated, he felt absolutely nothing. No, he said simply. Jennifer's breath hitched. Phil, I'm done. Jennifer let out a choked sob, dropping to her knees. Please. I'll do anything. I was stupid, but I swear, I learned my lesson. I need you. Phil took a step back, shaking his head. No. You needed to see if there was something better than me. And now that you know there isn't, you want to come back. Jennifer's face twisted with agony. That's not true. I was just... Get out. Jennifer froze. Phil gestured toward the door. We're done. Wedding's off. You made your choice, Jennifer. Now live with it. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she rose to her feet, wiping her tears. And then, just like before, the tears dried up. The begging stopped. Her face hardened. You'll regret this, she spat. You're throwing away the best thing that ever happened to you. Phil let out a breath. No, Jennifer. You did that. She stood there, shaking, fists clenched, before finally turning and storming out the door. Phil closed it behind her without another word. And for the first time in weeks, he felt free. Phil thought he was done. He had made it clear. Jennifer had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. He had cut her out of his life, deleted her number, and started returning the wedding gifts that had already arrived. But Jennifer's family had other plans. It started with a message from her mother, then another from her sister, then, finally, her father. They wanted to talk things through, to clear the air. Phil ignored them at first, but when Jennifer's father called and left a voicemail, something about his tone made Phil pause. He didn't sound angry or dismissive. He just sounded tired. So, against his better judgment, Phil agreed to meet. When he arrived at Jennifer's parents' house, the tension was immediate. Jennifer was there, sitting stiffly on the couch, her eyes red and puffy. Her mother sat beside her, smoothing her hair in a way that was almost condescending. Her sister, Nicole, leaned against the arm of the couch, arms crossed, looking more annoyed than concerned. Jennifer's father sat in his armchair, rubbing his temples. He looked older than Phil remembered, as if the last few days had aged him. Phil stayed near the doorway, keeping his distance. He had no interest in sitting down and pretending this was a reasonable conversation. Jennifer's mother was the first to speak. "Phil, sweetheart, I think we all just need to take a breath. You two have been together for so long. You don't want to throw it all away over a little misunderstanding." Phil's jaw tightened. It wasn't a misunderstanding. She lied. She planned to cheat. She admitted to wanting someone else. Jennifer's mother waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, honey, everyone gets cold feet before the wedding. It's completely normal to have doubts. To wonder about what-ifs before you commit to forever." Phil let out a slow, controlled breath. Doubts? Sure. Wanting to sleep with someone else and actively trying to do it? That's not doubts. That's betrayal. Jennifer's father sighed, shaking his head. "Jen, is this true?" Jennifer sniffled but didn't say anything. Her mother jumped in instead. "Oh, come on, let's not blow things out of proportion. She had a little lapse in judgment, but she didn't actually do anything, right? She didn't go through with it." Nicole rolled her eyes. "Honestly, Phil, you're acting like she slept with the guy in front of you. She didn't even cheat. It was just talk." Phil let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You want to know what she actually said? What she told her friends while we were engaged?" Jennifer's mother hesitated. "Phil, I don't think." Phil didn't let her finish. She said, "I just want to sleep with someone taller once before settling down." Silence. Jennifer's father looked like someone had punched him in the gut. His face went pale, and his mouth opened slightly, as if trying to form words that wouldn't come. Nicole's smug expression faded. Jennifer's mother shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I'm sure she didn't mean it like that." Phil shook his head. "She meant it exactly like that. She wasn't having pre-wedding jitters. She was shopping around to see if she could do better." Jennifer finally spoke, her voice shaking. "Phil, please." He held up a hand. "No. I've heard enough. I'm not going to marry someone who sees me as a backup plan. Someone who only wants me because her first choice didn't want her." Jennifer's mother grabbed his hand desperately. "Phil, sweetheart, please. She loves you. She chose you." Phil pulled his hand away. "No. She settled for me. That's not the same thing." Jennifer let out a quiet sob, curling into herself. Her father just sat there, shaking his head, looking at her like she was a stranger. Phil took one last look around the room. Then he walked out the door without looking back. And this time, he knew he wasn't coming back. Phil walked out of Jennifer's life that day and never looked back. He had spent nearly a decade building something with her, believing she was his forever, only to realize he had been nothing more than a safe option. A backup plan. The man she settled for when her first choice didn't want her. He refused to be that guy. The first thing he did was move. The apartment he had shared with Jennifer felt tainted. Everywhere he looked, he saw the ghost of their relationship, her perfume lingering in the air, the framed pictures of their engagement, the closet still half full of her things. He packed everything up in a single weekend, shoved her belongings into boxes, and had them sent to her parents' house without a note. Then, he hit the gym. It started as a distraction, something to burn off the anger that simmered inside him. The betrayal, the humiliation, the sheer audacity of Jennifer's actions. But soon, it became more than that. It became discipline, control, strength. With every rep, every mile, every drop of sweat, he felt himself shedding the weight of who he used to be. Jennifer had spent their relationship looking past him, always wondering if she could do better. She had spent so much time obsessing over height, over shallow, meaningless details, that she had missed what actually mattered. Loyalty, respect, commitment. She had none of those things, and Phil wasn't going to waste another second on someone who didn't see his worth. Months passed. He focused on himself, on his career, on his health. He reconnected with old friends, went on trips he and Jennifer had always talked about but never followed through on. he found happiness in his independence. And then, one evening, he met her. Sophia. She was nothing like Jennifer. She was 5 feet 2 inches, barely reaching Phil's chest, with warm brown eyes and a smile that could brighten even the worst days. She was a kindergarten teacher, patient and kind, radiating a warmth that made people feel instantly at home. But what stood out the most? She saw him. Not as a backup plan. Not as a good enough option. Not as someone to settle for when other choices fell through. She saw him for exactly who he was, and she liked him that way. Their connection was effortless. She didn't play games, didn't keep secrets, didn't make him feel like he constantly had to prove himself. She laughed at his jokes, remembered the little things, and never once made him feel like he wasn't enough. With Sophia, he didn't have to compete. He just was. Meanwhile, Jennifer was unraveling. At first, she tried to play it cool. She ignored their breakup publicly, pretending she was doing great. But as weeks turned into months, she started reaching out. First, it was a few texts, messages Phil never answered. Then, voicemails, long, emotional ones where she went from apologizing to blaming him to crying about how much she missed what they had. When that didn't work, she started sending letters. Actual, handwritten letters, as if that would somehow make her words more meaningful. Phil never opened a single one. The final blow to Jennifer's ego came when she learned that Derek, the basketball coach she had thrown everything away for, was dating someone else. And not just anyone. A model. Tall, gorgeous, successful. Everything Jennifer had fantasized about being. Except it wasn't her. Derek hadn't even given her a second thought after that night at the bar. She had humiliated herself trying to get his attention, only to be ignored like she was nothing. And now she had nothing. No fiancé. No dream wedding. No better option. Just regret. Phil didn't feel sorry for her. Not even a little. She had made her choice. And he had made his. True love wasn't measured in inches. It was measured in respect. And Jennifer had never respected him. But Sophia did. And that made all the difference.